Well, Maryanne, Charles, welcome. I'm so excited to have both of you on the show today. It's a bit of a reunion because we worked together, I can't believe, over a decade ago now. Maryanne and Charles have since gone on to have incredible careers, people that I feel very privileged to have worked with and learned a ton from. And both of them have found their way to Lovable, which is one of the hottest AI companies right now. And it's hot not only because they're doing really amazing technology, but also because they're really at the forefront of how to integrate people and culture as a part of that. We have so many things to dive into today with both of you. But before we go there, I was hoping maybe you could introduce yourselves to our audience and maybe introduce Lovable to our audience too, in case some of them haven't heard about this really amazing product. Maryanne, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Maryanne. I have the great privilege of leading the people team out here in Stockholm. Lovable is a product that enables you to build really anything. Last night, I was helping my sons build a video game, kind of a modern take on My Singing Monsters, if you will. Especially in this AI movement, it's a very empowering tool to help build anything you can dream of.
Maryanne, you've had an incredible career. I know before we worked together, you do some really exciting things, having come from Google and then gone on to Dropbox. And then after Gusto, where you took over for me as head of people, you went on to become the head of people at Notion before going to Lovable, which are just iconic cultures, each of those companies in and of themselves. Charles, could you introduce a bit of your background for the audience and your experience? Because you've done some really amazing things and worked for some pretty notable people in your career as well.
Thank you. Full disclosure, I'm about to move tomorrow, so you can see in the background all my stuff. I've been leading recruiting at a couple of companies for the past 10 plus years. So one of them was with you, Jess, and Maryanne, obviously, at Gusto. And then I worked at a company called Neuralink, which is an Elon Musk company, where essentially the goal there was to do R&D and find the best engineers that you could find in the world. And then I did leadership recruiting at Meta, specifically in product leadership. I started in Menlo Park, and then I moved to London, and that's how I got to Europe. And now I'm at Lovable, and I'm running the recruiting team at Lovable, and I'm in London, but moving to Stockholm tomorrow.
Amazing. I'd love to dive into, because each of you have seen some incredible companies and hypergrowth environments. Charles, your span has been incredible from Meta, the really large levels, to very early stage startups. Maryanne has also been from the Googles of the world as well to the startup world. And as you've been company building and thinking about people leadership, I'm curious, are there common threads that you've noticed or seen that you carry forth and are putting into place at Lovable that have sort of transcended company and stage?
I think one thing that I've noticed with all those companies, just like Gusto, Neuralink, and Lovable, and even Meta to some extent, is the obsession over talent. And that's true, no matter what. Those great companies are built over with talent, and the first couple of hundred hires that you make will define the shape of this company. And I think the role of a founder, they clearly understand the importance of being involved in recruiting and hiring. And so for Elon, for example, at Neuralink, he was involved in hiring and approving all the hires that we'd be making for the first 100 hires, and he would meet them in person. And then at Gusto, Josh, as you remember, was very involved in doing this hiring committee and approving all the offers and so on. And Anton is no exception. He's literally involved he's obsessed over talent. And so it might not be the same obsession that they have for the talent, but it is an obsession in general in hiring the right talent for the company early on. And the other thing that I've noticed is the speed of decision making. It's a constant between the four of them, I would say.
We often hear the old chestnut of you can optimize for cost or quality or speed. And what I heard you say is that these hypergrowth environments have been effective at optimizing for both speed and quality of talent. Does that mean cost is off the charts? Or what's the secret to move fast and get the best talent? I wonder if having a fabulous brand name or a famous CEO founder, helps with that. But is there something else for those organizations that may not have that massive public profile?
I actually think a lot of it comes down to how you build trust with candidates and employees as well. We pay very competitively at Lovable. We want to hire the best talent. And so our compensation philosophy absolutely reflects who we're trying to recruit in. So we've tried to remove compensation as a discussion topic, candidly, from the table of why or why not you would join. We don't pay like as top as like maybe some companies, but it's certainly like you can live a very comfortable life if you join a Lovable, and that's by design. And I think it's more about like how you're building that trust and transparency with employees on kind of what the package looks like, both from the compensation, but also the upside, like the community they're going to build and the career opportunities they're going to have.
And I would add, maybe Maryanne is not taking enough credit here, but like the systems that we built very early on is what allows us to move really fast. So like for a company of 100+ employees, we have like very comprehensive comp bands. So it doesn't really answer your questions about cost. I mean, yeah, like cost is like how much you decide to pay them. But to move really fast, like all the recruiters have like a source of truth that they can go to where it's already there, already getting leveled. There's a comment for each level, for each location. Like we hire in UK, in Sweden, in the US, in Boston, SF, like it's plug and play. And I think this like allows us to move really fast because we don't have to like literally like find the market data and do ad hoc stuff. Like it's already systematic.
Our theme for the people team is systems over heroics, is essentially, which is we're trying to move away from individual heroics to like the systems that we actually need to scale.
At Gusto, I think one of the things that we experienced was like Docpocalypse. I remember that you had named it. Of like there were so many documents going around, and like simplifying that and unifying it and coming back to like these single sources of truth was a really critical part to that speed. And maybe Gusto was like one of those examples too. I think at first we sort of played with this idea of like hire as many people as fast as possible, but we certainly had limits with compensation because we weren't trying to pay 90th percentile of market. We were actually paying very much middle of market. And so we were getting very creative of all these other things to kind of make sure that we had that triangle you're talking about, Andrew, to move fast.
If I reflect over the past like 5 or 6 months, like what we've done with Maryanne and what Maryanne has been taking the lead on, this is probably based on experience, but like we're launching values and we're screening candidates against values. We have comp bands by geolocation. We have an approval process for candidate to get approved by a founder. We have bar raiser processes as well. So like we want to make sure that we have the right rubrics for each candidates that we interview. We have headcount planning, which is like kind of crazy. This company is like 12 months plus old, and we have all those systems in place, right? That like you would see at a company that's like more like 3 or 4 year mature. So I think, yeah, like to answer your question, having previous experience in that domain is really helping us here because we can move a lot faster having done it before.
I'm curious, Maryanne, as you came in and diagnosed what was needed and in what order, how did you figure that out? Because I think there is a temptation to come in and like just suddenly stand up everything because you've seen what it looks like at scale. And a lot of the programs that Charles bringing up and like tons of value in having these exist, but at the same time, some organizations have a hard time ingesting that much change that fast. And so how do you figure out like how much change can an organization handle, and like what are, to Andrew's question around a diagnosis of like, how do you figure out which ones are the first few building blocks, knowing that eventually all of them need to be put in place?
I think something that's unique about Lovable's interview process is I spent like a week out here co-working with the team before I signed the offer. So like I felt like even before I joined as an executive, I really got to know. I talked to like every employee at the time who was here in my interview process. I think that gives you a little bit of credibility when you join as well, that you've spent so much time. And I saw even some of my suggestions when I was interviewing got like implemented while I kind of was in my decision-making process. So I thought I think it's kind of unique to Lovable as well. I think it's so important though to get to know employees and to get to know especially the founders at founder-led companies. I think founder DNA is so important. And Charles referenced this earlier, like everyone's obsessed with talent, but like at Lovable, what great talent looks like is a little bit different than what we would have looked for at like a Notion and a Gusto. And so I think it's like really taking the time to understand like who is the star talent and like what makes them so, like what really needs to be true to be successful at like a Lovable, and then kind of building the system around that. So I don't think you want to just implement something blindly by any means. It's more about like understanding that secret sauce. And I think we found a lot of things to be true and Lovable. We actually talk a lot about the concept of unlearning. It's very different at Lovable than like a SaaS company. Like this is an AI native company and the speed is unmatched. And so something we've talked a lot about is every week I bring up, like, what are you unlearning this week that you would have brought from past companies that you now need to unlearn? Because the speed is just unmatched to anything I've experienced before, both in terms of revenue growth, but in terms of how decisions are made, in terms of how the product roadmap changes because the models are changing. And so, like, there's this real concept of, like, can you thrive in chaos as being, like, instrumental to being successful here? If you can't do that, it just wouldn't be a fit.
Can you give some examples of what people are unlearning? Because I think that so many folks have grown up in SaaS companies who are going into AI companies, and it'd be helpful just to even understand what is some of this like model breaking that you have to do in your brain in order to be successful in an AI company.
There's almost this instant trust you're given at an AI company just to ship things. And that's something we care about at Lovable is, like, you should ship something in your first week. I'll give an example. I hired Charles as my head of recruiting and then my head of environment, Jonathan, my first week at this company. Traditionally, you would kind of wait a month, you get to know the culture, you want to make sure your hire is the right fit. But I was like, I don't have time. I'm going to go hire now. And so you find that there's almost like less stakeholder management and buy-in at a company because there's so much work that needs to be done. You're just kind of trusting that everyone has the best intent and is going, and then, like, you're just trying to keep speed up. So I'd say any system we've designed is around speed and velocity and keeping things moving as fast as possible. And so I view that very much that the people team is here to help the company move faster. It does mean, though, there's less like consensus-driven decisions. You're just trusted to go, and you can always undo a decision here.
That's key, that undoing of a decision being built.
Even decisions that previously at other companies I would have thought were like irreversible, that like one-way and two-way door decision-making framework, even here, some of those you're able to go and then kind of revert back.
Can you give me more like an example of that? Because I'm so curious, like what would have been irreversible at another company, but here.
I think like location strategies would be like a good example on the HR side.
As in, like, initially thinking you need everybody to be in Sweden and now being global, or is it something different?
Totally. I mean, like, we initially started with like, a couple of locations, but like we have to be open that if we want to capture the best talent, we may very much open like another hub. And then you have to look at like where are our customers and where are people paying us. And so you have to like react to this and maybe open an office in locations where like there are like customers, like APAC being like one of them, where at some point you might need to think about that as well. So when we're at Gusto, as an example, just to be very specific, we're very careful about looking for a second hub. And it took us like a good 6 months to think about it. And we evaluated like cities and what the talent looked like. And I feel like at Lovable, it's like, okay, like tomorrow we need to open an office in this location and this location, and we just go.
And there is the same rigor of thought and there is like principles. It's just condensed, I would say, from 6 months to like a day. And so it's not that there's not rigorous decisions being made, because I think the quality that we're using is quite high. It's just the time frame is so different.
So fast. And just if I may go back on your initial question, Jess, if you come to a company with a roadbook of things that you've done in the past and you apply them directly, and how do you know what to apply? I think something that's really important is to embrace the company culture, like Maryanne mentioned, but specifically like Lovable is a Swedish company. And so what it means is like, if we come and have this SF kind of Bay Area mentality, I mean, yeah, it's great. And like we've done it successfully in the Bay Area, but it's not really what a Swedish like company is. And so there's like elements in the culture of working for like a Swedish founder, a Swedish based company, where we have to embrace that.
I'm wondering if there's any context that you can share around the evolution and change that happens as a hypergrowth company grows. So, Elad Gil, I borrow a lot from his book, the High Growth Handbook and the People Leader Accelerator curriculum. He talks about your leadership team might be totally different every 12 to 24 months. And you need to be thoughtful about hiring stage appropriate leaders. And I see this a lot in the private equity work that I do. You move from, founder-led, more family style businesses to institutionalized, professionally led businesses with more structure. And that usually leads to pretty significant changes in the leadership team. I'm wondering if at Lovable and Notion and Gusto and these many other experiences that you have where the company is going through hockey stick like growth, if you're seeing quite a few transitions on the leadership team, or if you are somehow baking in hiring people that are going to be successful at multiple stages?
I think I've always been blessed that at like the companies I've worked for, the executive team has been like relatively stable, all things considered. And then I find where there's the most movement is people who are kind of maybe early stage at the company and moving up into management. And so I don't actually find it's like the directs of the CEO necessarily, but it's kind of like that layer below of who's scaling to meet like the needs of the business at like that stage in time. But I think it's really important to invest in kind of like early talent and trying to help them find the best pathway for them to preserve like the DNA of the company as well. Because institutional knowledge helps you move so much faster as well.
I have a prediction, Andrew. I think this
Yeah.
is not a lovable observation because it hasn't happened, but more of a market observation here is that I think there will be exec in residence. And so per your comment that like things move really fast, that you have like, you know, a leadership team in place at a stage of a company and then the company grows really fast. You could have like execs coming and do a mission almost for like 6 months because they
Yeah.
bring like a set of expertise that you don't have, and then they either go on and move on to a different company. But my prediction is like you could have like some executive that would be doing like some mission like this, almost like in a residence basis.
Yeah, like a tour of duty. Like you were here to take us from X to Y, and then someone else that's been from Y to Z can come do that tour. That's a really interesting concept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And might
Thank you.
build on like the fractional model that's sort of in existence today, where you see
Yeah.
more executives coming in part-time and fractional, but
Yep.
it sounds like more of this full-time, short-term. That's really fun. And I think matches too, because then you have that set expectation of like your skill set and your need is going to be better for this stage, knowing that beyond that stage, we are going to need someone else. And we don't have all the awkwardness that comes with like having to exit people who are thinking they're
The
there
only
for longer term.
pushback I would have is I don't think that we're going to scale headcount as quickly as like an AI native company as kind of a SaaS business would as well. And so I think that changes for some roles because you're going to have agents kind of next to employees co-working. And so I would think Lovable in terms of headcount, while the revenue growth is, you know, incredible, like the headcount growth by design, if I'm doing my job, shouldn't be as fast as it would have been at a SaaS company. And so I actually think that changes almost like how long people can also stay on board and in seat for certain roles.
Great observation. I think we're seeing that for sure at AI forward companies where you don't need it to scale nearly as quickly. Some of the concepts I've been hearing lately are like that you now have these super ICs, so that you have people who are individuals who are running agents. And so you don't need to have like the vast amounts of teams, but you're also not needing necessarily new grads as much or more junior people. I'm also hearing of some leaders talking about how the managerial skill set to learn is how to manage agents as opposed to managing necessarily people. And I'm curious, as you think about like org structure, career development, what comes up for you along the lines of like how AI is changing, what the implications are for how you're building out the team at Lovable?
I think because Lovable's an AI native company, I mean, it's been around for what, like 14 to 16 months. It's almost like by design, anyone who's joined the company is really excited about like what AI can do. Like we wouldn't hire someone unless they had built something on Lovable, as an example. Like you wouldn't hire someone unless they were using AI workflows in their job before they joined Lovable. And so I think it's probably in the DNA a little bit already of like who chooses to join Lovable and who we hire is kind of there. I don't think we're managing agents yet, though. I know that that is like very in vogue to talk about. I could see a future world where that does happen. We talk about it more, though, of like an agent can help you kind of double your output by like continuing your work overnight. And so it's more of like making sure everyone's using agents to amplify their workflows. And then there's some teams where, you know, you can get more leverage and scale. So CX is a great example. Recruiting is an example. Engineering is a great example. And there you have more of a tops down mandate or mantra of like which tools to use to kind of elevate yourself. But it's more right now, I'd say, a cultural and a social expectation than a tops down mandate.
The other comment that I would make, and this is not specific to people, but it is about hiring and how you think about talent. So design is fascinating right now in AI. We'll be doing some coding. The engineer will be doing some design. The lines are very blurry in an AI native companies. And I think design is actually an area where like it's coming at a very frontier of AI. And you see those two words like completely kind of like mixing with one another. As an example, I think earlier this week, we realized like one of the design engineer has more lines of code or commits. I don't know how they say it, but like commits to more code than like our full stack engineers. It's just because like the design engineer now can actually do like so much coding with AI agent. So when you think about hiring, the lines are like very blurry between those skill sets now. That's something
Yeah.
that I have to unlearn as well.
I think the latest episode of Lenny's podcast, they had on the head of design from Anthropic, basically saying like design is dead or some very clickbaity title. And so, yeah, the lines are definitely changing. Within the people team, how is your team using AI? What does that look like? I saw on LinkedIn that like your front desk person created an app for like visitors who come and it'll like ping people in the office who need to know that that visitor is there. It's awesome to see. What other examples are there on your team about how AI is getting integrated?
If you think about a candidate experience, like when a candidate comes on site or is traveling to Stockholm, we have this whole Lovable app now where like basically their interviews is integrated into the Lovable app with details about the city, their flight, their info, the schedule, and so on. So we do use Lovable quite a bit for the candidate experience. Then obviously like CloudWorks has been kind of impressive on the sourcing side because you can run a query very fast and then have people from your network and your emails and LinkedIn connection and do a search, and you wake up the next day and you have like the top 15 profiles that are literally like the best profile for the roles that you would have never thought about. On the recruiting side, I think sourcing is going to tremendously change and it's going to be fully automated by AI agents who are going to do a very good job at finding surfacing profiles. I do think human interactions and human touches are never going to go away to close candidate and to provide a very good candidate experience. But on the sourcing side, I see that changing very drastically.
It's so complicated today with AI on AI. I see so many increasingly scary, seems to be real candidates and recruiters reaching out. And if the companies are using AI for sourcing and screening, and you have phishing attacks that are using fake candidates or fake jobs, and it seems like it's an AI arms war that's escalating on both sides in the employment environment. And I'm wondering, especially for an organization as rapidly growing as yours is, that's technology dependent, how are you dealing with that type of complexity with phishing and fake candidates?
We still have very much an in-person culture. And so our interview process also has an in-person element. So I think part of it's just connected to the cultural decision to be in the office 5 days a week.
And then obviously we have like AI screening tools to answer, Andrew, like obviously whatever ATS you decide to use. We use obviously note taking and we use like screening resumes, and there are filters for that where they can filter for bots out.
Great. We need it. We need to filter those bots. Well, I'm so excited by the work that you're doing. I don't think I shared this with you before our interview, that I have spent dozens of hours on Lovable building a performance management tool tied to a note taker and transcription tool. And so I have some firsthand experience with it. After spending a lot of time in Figma using Lovable to build front end, it is amazing how non-technical people, I'm pointing at myself, can do some things that otherwise we would have been reliant on engineers to do for us.
Like last night, I actually created, I'm calling it Lovable Coach. We do a lot of recording of team meetings and one-on-ones on Granola and just other kind of note-taking apps. So I've actually basically connected it and then trained the coach. So it's like in connection with our values, can you evaluate like how people showed up in that meeting? And so connecting across Notion and Slack and whatever your, solution is. And I actually found it was very accurate for me in terms of like coaching areas I need. But I also felt like I was almost like instantly more receptive to it because it felt less like a personal jab and more of this objective of like, this is how you're showing up. This is where your communication. And so what I want to do is build like a lovable coach that's connected to what we care about, but then like weaves in training on these micro moments. So like in a meeting, if you're showing up like that, you could say like, hey, you said you were working on this. FYI, you're kind of showing up like that. And our CEO actually does this after every meeting. He always asks how he did the meeting and to grade him and like to give him feedback. And so you actually see it from the top of like using it as a coaching system too.
That's such a powerful use case. I have to imagine that at an organization like yours at Lovable, that there might be greater receptivity to using AI in the background and transcribing and providing advice.
Now you kind of see the power of having all of that data. It only matters if you actually have some structure around the data, though, where there's actually like one note-taking app that then everyone can go to reference. And so I do think there needs to be some sort of systems in place for the company.
This is me speaking personally. It seems like we can get in our own way sometimes trying to protect the psychological safety or sanctity of a team meeting or a one-on-one or a project review, where if we can structure that data and have a unbiased third-party tool, let us know what's on track and off track and running on schedule and not on schedule. And I think of Humu with giving little prompts to move things along. Like that seems super helpful, but there's this human nature angst of, do I really want to have AI listening to all the stuff? And when can I really be real? So I really give you and the team credit, Maryanne, for experimenting.
There's a trend amongst companies who do have these systems in place. Zapier's Brandon Samu, he actually does like a report card for himself. So he like takes all of this data and then has his criteria for himself, and it'll grade him on things like how well are you developing your people? How well are you giving like, hard feedback to people who need it, that type of thing. And so I think you can really have a lot of data that you can customize and be able to use, not necessarily even feedback, but feed forward for behaviors that you can encourage and avoid.
Because I was thinking, like, what I'd like to do is kind of once you get the layer of like the one-on-one coach, then we should be able to kind of build out like what are the themes by either sub-team or department of like kind of known gaps from a skill set perspective that we need to coach. And like that kind of macro data that weaves it all together is actually very powerful, because then we can either decide, is it a hiring problem? Do we need to invest more in training? And so like, I think that macro level is also what I'm excited about as well, to kind of get that bigger picture view.
Absolutely. And I think the more powerful the system, like if you have rubrics built out, then you can have the AI actually matching it against all of that criteria for that level and for all the different skills more seamlessly in the background, as opposed to needing a manager to sit there and like evaluate every single one. Google, they're now even doing like from performance reviews, you don't even need to write your performance review. Like their system just like gathers all of your work and all your communications and evaluates it against the rubric and writes it up and says, this is how you did against your OKRs. And I was like, that definitely feels like we're living in the future when you can get to that level of sort of data being centralized and being able to be used in that way. I'm curious to take things back to like AI and AI fluency. You'd mentioned like now, of course, you're wanting to hire people who have used Lovable. It's been out in the wild for over a year now. And so that's an easy way to be able to say like, hey, does this person sort of have an interest in what we're doing, passion for our mission, some AI skills? A lot of companies are trying to figure out how do we test for AI fluency. And in addition to like, have you built something on Lovable? Are there other criteria or other things that you look for as indicators of, yes, this person sort of really understands AI?
Yes, there is general curiosity for sure on AI. That's like something that we assess for. And then there's also what have you done with AI tools? So like it's like we expect everyone to be using AI, but what's most important is like what have you done with an AI tool? And then you need to see some proof and like some work being done with it. If you look for someone to join the team in the finance, like FBoss, if they have been using AI, we do a test with them, like a home assignment. And then the home assignment is basically like, how are you using AI to make your job like better and faster? And we want to apply that across like different orgs. So there's definitely an assessment now, like, which is like a practical assessment about what do you do with AI.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. I think a lot of people have a lot of ideas about AI. And what I'm curious about is like, how have you actually used it? And are you a practitioner and like real life practical examples? And so like, I would always go into like the follow-up questions of kind of the why. I also think it's helpful to kind of understand the limitations of AI, of when you should not use it as well. And so, discernment and craftsmanship and taste matter quite a bit as well. And so I actually like to ask, how does AI make your job worse? And I actually have a funny example from a recruiter, which is if you were to record all of your interviews with candidates, if you were to ask like an AI tool how the candidate did, it defaults to positivity. It always makes somebody sound like really structured and really insightful. And then you kind of like read the raw notes and you read the AI summary, and it's always so structured and wonderful, and it has a positive tint. That actually isn't that helpful. And so I thought that was one of the funnier examples of like, it's actually not the most effective tool whenever you're asking for like a summary of the candidate call as an example.
That's true.
It's a super helpful example of, we all sound so much more structured.
I sound
and
great on AI, but
Right?
yeah.
How do you manage that for the team? How do you think about that balance of like, we are doing this like world changing, transformational, once in a lifetime kind of feels like in the moment work. And so we want to do more and do it faster, and we can, but we're also people and human, and you're also in Sweden, and Sweden's kind of known for having work-life balance. Like, how does that all go together?
I mean, I think one element to answer is we don't have a choice, honestly. And the reason for this, Jess, is competition. I think competition has never been as intense as it is in this AI native world. And basically, if Lovable doesn't succeed, doesn't ship product, doesn't capture more market share, doesn't have more tools, more feature, then we will stop to exist. Like, it's just very simple. That's the name of the game. And so when you talk about intensity and doing as much as possible, we don't really have a choice. I think this is kind of like the name of the game in AI these days. And everyone at Lovable understands that. Like, we do have like a reality check intensity pledge. So this is something that Maryanne has been working with our founder, which is essentially what it is to work at Lovable. And as warm as the logo looks like and the little heart and all of this, it is actually like a pretty intense company. And then also for being in Swedish, it is not like the typical Swedish like company culture. It's my point of view on this. There's a counter current. There's like the Swedish culture that we know about that's very well established. And then there are like a layer underground of people that want to do like really hardcore stuff and work really hard. And Lovable is the perfect place for that. And you would always find that like if you have a countercurrent momentum, you would find some people who are very much into it. And I think Lovable attracts a lot of those talent.
I love that you're expectation setting, but what do you set expectations on? There was so much discussion last year about 996 and having this explicitness around hours and days in the office. And what does it look like for Lovable and this intensity pledge?
Yeah, and we're definitely not a 996 culture by any means, but I think we care about authenticity and being transparent, that we think for the next like year to two, it is going to be relatively intense to work at Lovable. And even our founder will say, in a couple of years, it probably won't be the case. I think that's true of most startups at this stage too. And so what I wanted to do with, prospective employees is just be really honest of like what it's like. So the thing we talk about more is like the pace is relentless. So it's, we want people to ship on day one. So if you come in and you need a 30-day on-ramp period, we jokingly called it non-boarding for a period of time. We now actually do have onboarding, but that kind of gives you a sense of like, how is your non-boarding going? Because you were basically just shipping. There's a lot around like ownership, that you are just trusted to own significant parts of the product or business from day one because it's such a small team for like the span. We talk a lot about like work-life integration, not necessarily balance. And so we're open that we're building something really ambitious and it does require some dedication. And so what that means is that like sometimes you might actually be so excited about what you're doing that you want to have a jam session with your coworkers over a dinner. I help kind of facilitate the expat community. And so I've had everyone over to my house for dinner. So there's a real like social connectivity to the company as well. And I think to fully appreciate all that Lovable is, you'd want to participate in that in some way.
Yeah, I feel like it's building too in some ways back to this. It's not necessarily old school startup culture, but like the startup culture from pre-pandemic.
I feel like I'm back in 2010 sometimes. Yes. I know that it's a different style of company, but there are similarities to like that era.
Question for Maryanne. I've had this one brewing as we've talked about the pace and the expectation to ship and the high level of trust. I'm wondering if in this environment you do traditional performance reviews, or if strong no there. What's your approach to providing feedback to gauging productivity? How do you handle it at a hypergrowth environment like yours?
Yeah, we do quarterly signal reviews where it's a set of just a handful of questions that we ask the managers, and it takes maybe a couple minutes per person. And it's essentially a version of a keeper test of like, would you hire the person again? We really care deeply about our values. How are they kind of trending on track, off track with their value, and then their impact. So how are their results? And then we use that to have just a conversation of really, maybe who needs more support to be successful in the role, but also to kind of identify outliers of like who's really exceptional that we should be giving more scope to as well. And so it's really about like kind of finding the edge cases. At Lovable, we've kind of removed compensation as a conceptually from our performance review. And so what we're planning to do is to essentially just do like a quite generous merit adjustment that's on every year you're here, you're going to get a very generous merit adjustment on that 1-year anniversary. And so that way your performance review won't actually like connect back to your compensation. If we're here after a year, we trust that you are shipping and delivering, and we are going to take care of you on the comp. So we're really trying to remove compensation from the discussion so you can just focus on shipping and moving faster. But I think it's important that like people need to know they're being taken care of in terms of compensation. They need to know how it works. And I think performance reviews, unfortunately, have kind of become that. So you still have to solve for compensation to be able to do something like a signal review.
Just to play that back, what I'm hearing is an accelerated cycle of reviews. So rather than annual, it's more of a quarterly.
But there's no
format.
like self-review, peer feedback. It is very much like a pulse check.
Is there a calibration step there across groups?
Yep. Yeah. We still do a calibration. And I think people, to really like talk and to make sure everyone's aligned. And I think it's important to have a shared understanding across like different leadership groups. So like who's top talent, like what are we doing to invest and take care of them, especially with how competitive the market is, who might not be succeeding in their current role, and is there anything we can do to kind of help them? And so there's a lot of kind of interest in like making sure we talk about that. But we've removed like weeks from the process of like the self-review, the peer feedback, that. And then you'll find that people still want to grow and develop. And that's where actually creating like the Lovable coach has been quite fun, where like, I don't know, I found it quite helpful in coaching myself.
I guess I'm also hearing with that delinking, at least in terms of timing, of the quarterly feedback with a compensation adjustment, that a lot of organizations have a focal point review process so that they can manage to a budget. And so this might be another example of you're focused on quality and speed rather than cost. So cost might be higher because you're not managing as easily to a centralized merit budget. You're making more individualized decisions, but hey, you're able to do that because you're well-funded, you're having a lot of success, and that's a
Well,
conscious choice.
I did do analysis of like the hours we would save from a process like this. And you actually end up coming out ahead by just being generous on cash, but like saving like 6 weeks a year. So like if you think about end productivity, like if I can keep engineers happy and shipping, that's, I think, like a win for everybody. It's been fun to kind of experiment with. And that's what's fun about working at Lovable is one of our values is dare to be different.
But I love that you're tying this back to the business and the fundamentals of like, and here's how much money we save by actually making this more efficient and effective. And there's real implications too around the level of engagement you'll get from people and the retention that you'll get from people by putting the compensation piece first and foremost in a way where people don't have to think about it or worry about it, and minimizing how much time is being spent on the performance management. You've mentioned you introduced headcount planning. And in an environment like this, what does the accelerated version or more flexible dynamic version of headcount planning look like? Because I'm just thinking back to when we all worked together and what that process looked like. And I'm just curious, what does it look like now? That seems like it's the new and improved modern version of this.
I don't think AI agents have solved the forever dilemma I have of headcount planning, but one day I hope it does. I don't think that traditional planning structure works as well. It's more of like, what do you need us to hire in the next 90 days? And that seems to be about like the rhythm that works. And then it's like, okay, based on the capacity that we have available, how are we going to prioritize the roles and like stack rank kind of thing? But I found like that flow is working well enough right now, but I think it'll evolve in time.
And how do you think about the, like, how much business justification? Because like traditionally companies have people, submit some report or a few pages about why and what they're going to do and what they need to output. But What does that look
I think
like
there's a
at
high
Lovable?
degree of trust in leaders and managers at Lovable. And like we obviously have like budgets that you stay within it. And then, you have like a quick chat with the CEO, but you're hired to know what you're doing and to hire for your team. It's actually been fascinating to see because it's again a much faster process. And so you might have a couple of, roles where you're like, did we really need that? But all in all, you kind of end out net the same you would if you have this like arduous, long kind of planning cycle, but you're still saving weeks. And so I think that's always the question of like when you are optimizing for speed, if you're okay with a little bit of chaos, you probably are saving a lot of time, even if there's, a couple of things here or there that aren't as pretty and like maybe need, some fine tuning over time. But we're okay with that chaos for speed.
Well, I think my big takeaway here is around executing, moving. You're learning more as you go along rather than sort of spending too much time in that planning and collecting evidence mode, and that trade-off for being in a super competitive market and one that is fast evolving is actually very, very necessary for success here.
And very directly setting expectations around that so people aren't surprised that it's happening.
Yeah.
I do think because it's Swedish origin, the degree of trust here is unlike anything I've experienced. And like, I think that comes back to being a Swedish company in particular, how much the founders trust and how that's just in who they are and their DNA.
What does it look like if somebody starts losing trust? Or have we not seen that yet? Because it's only a year in.
It's a quite direct culture, I would say. So, I mean, like we talk about candor over comfort, and then you talk about the speed. You wouldn't go like a month doing something that was maybe off-putting. You would probably know the next day at this company.
Yeah.
You would just kind of get it in a Slack channel publicly, or someone would tell you in person. So there wouldn't be things left unsaid, I would say, at a level.
I love that.
You have time to course correct is how I would say, but you're not going to be surprised by it a month later.
Those two go so well together, right? We can have high trust because we're also very direct with each other. And so if there's anything that feels out of alignment, you'll know very quickly. Andrew, do you want to take us through the accelerator round questions?
Yeah, let's do it. For Maryanne and Charles, we ask generally the same list of questions in closing to all of our guests to make sure that our audience of mid to senior HR leaders that are looking to grow in their career get those specific nuggets of wisdom from you. So maybe we'll start with Maryanne and ask for Charles to weigh in on each of these. First question is about learning. People Leader Accelerator alums and listeners, we really love high leverage learning. So if each of you could recommend, let's say no more than 2 resources for an emerging, growing people leader, what 2 sources would make your cut?
Listen to Lenny's podcast every week. And I know it's not like an HR specific podcast, but I think if you want to work in tech, I think it's almost like a must listen to of like what's happening and to kind of know the trends. I've always had like a network of other people leaders that I've always really respected and admired. And I find it such a welcome community. And even upon moving to Sweden, it's like the European heads of people have all reached out. And now I'm in like multiple kind of like dinners and groups with them. And so I've always found my peer group, like my direct reports and my peer group is kind of candidly been one of the best resources, especially right now. Things are changing so much that it's helpful just to have a group to think about and generate ideas with.
Charles, before you jump in, Maryanne, for the listeners, is that an informal group or is it sponsored by some organization? Like, is this something somebody could join?
For me, it's always informal. I like to kind of collect like who you're going to be at the groups with.
Your curated group of trusted confidants. Perfect. All right, get to know Maryanne and maybe you'll get a dinner invite.
Yeah, I'll double down on the network. I think this is definitely something that I would encourage. I think it's the best resources. I mean, for person, the network is probably the biggest impact that you can have on your career. I think personally is just talking to people who are doing the job, understanding like how they're doing the job and so on. The other thing is, even if we're in a people function, understanding the business really matters, I think, for us to be successful. I actually kind of like differentiate like performance on teams, in the people teams, with people who truly understand the business and are curious about it. So this is not like a specific resource, but I do feel like having natural curiosity around like how the business metrics doing, like how do you think about costs, like how is your business functioning? You have to like be invested in this, I think, long term to be successful.
Love it. So network and know the business. Back to Maryanne, our next accelerator question is, what one sentence of advice could you share to our listeners about how to accelerate their HR careers?
I think it goes back to what Charles just said of like really deeply understanding the business, especially for a founder-led company, like really understanding like the DNA of the founders and making sure you're kind of preserving what makes the company special as you scale and that you feel kind of in sync with them. There's this leader I worked with who said like it's always like a dimmer, not a light switch. And so I think finding that alignment with the founders up front is so important, even before you join a company.
I think the best advice is not the role specifically, but it is the company that you decide to join. It has a much, much bigger impact on your career, Andrew, than like the specific role that you want. Because growth gives you so much more opportunities to learn. This is gonna sound cheesy, but on this podcast, I have two of my former or current bosses. And so picking your boss, picking your manager matters so much, right? I always say people quit their job not because of compensation or commute, but they quit their job because of management. And so I think management is really important. You have to be super thoughtful about who you're going to be working with and for.
Last accelerator question is, how could our listeners connect with each of you?
Hit me up on LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn.
And come to Sweden. Visit Sweden, come to Stockholm. We'll host you at Lovable. Actually, like if you want to connect with us, create an app on Lovable. We'll take a look at it, come to Sweden, and then connect on LinkedIn.
Perfect.
Love it. Thank you both for taking the time. Really appreciate the insights that you've shared today. And it's so wonderful to see that you're working together again and doing amazing things. Appreciate you both.
It's good to see you, Jess, and it's very nice to meet you, Andrew.